This is Top Accolade Global News Update. I am Abiodun Mohammed. Russian troops have stepped up an assault on the small salt mining town of Solda in eastern Ukraine, forcing Ukrainian troops to repel waves of attacks led by mercenary forces, officials in Kiev said. Britain's defense ministry said on Tuesday that Russian and forces of the Wagner contract group were probably now in control of most of the town in the industrial Donbas region after advances in the last 4 days. Seizing Solda would be advantageous to Russian forces as they fight for control of the city of Bakhmut, a few kilometers to the southwest, where troops from both sides have been taking heavy losses in some of the most intense trench warfare since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 11 months ago. It would also give Russia a welcome battlefield victory after a series of setbacks in recent months. Prominent journalist Yuri Butusov, who is embedded with Ukrainian troops in Solda, said that Russian forces had established fire control over the main Ukrainian supply route to the town. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly video address on Monday that Bakhmut and Solda were holding on despite widespread destruction. He cited new and fiercer attacks in Solda, where he said no walls have been left standing and the land was covered with Russian corpses. China began retaliating on Tuesday against South Korea and Japan, two of the countries which have imposed COVID-19 curbs on travelers from China, the last major economy to reopen its border after 3 years of isolation. China's embassy in Seoul said it has suspended the issuance of short-term visas for visitors from South Korea. Japan's Kyodo News Agency reported that Beijing has imposed similar measures against Japan. China reopened its borders on Sunday, removing the last major restriction that was part of a zero-COVID regime, which it abruptly began dismantling in early December after historic protests against the curbs. The frequent lockdowns, relentless testing and various other movement curbs since early 2020 have brought the world's second-largest economy to one of its slowest growth rates in nearly half a century and caused widespread distress. With the virus let loose, China has stopped publishing daily infection tallies. It has been reporting 5 or fewer deaths a day since the policy U-turn, figures that have been disputed by the World Health Organization and are inconsistent with funeral homes reporting a surge in demand for their services. The United States, South Korea, France and others introduced testing requirements in response to China's COVID outbreak. Far-right former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro was admitted to a hospital in Florida on Monday with stomach pains as 1,500 of his supporters were rounded up in Brasilia after storming key buildings in the capital over the weekend. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, a leftist who took office on January 1st after defeating Bolsonaro in an October election, vowed to bring those responsible to justice. He accused rioters of trying to overthrow democracy and questioned why the army had not discouraged calls for a military coup outside their barracks. On Sunday, angry mobs rampaged through Congress, the Supreme Court and presidential offices, smashing windows, furniture and artwork in the worst attack on state institutions since Brazil's return to democracy in the 1980s. Bolsonaro, who flew to the United States days before his term in office ended, went to a hospital in Orlando on Monday, complaining of intestinal pains related to a stabbing he suffered during the 2018 election campaign. His doctor said he has an intestinal blockage that was not serious and would likely not need surgery. In an interview with newsmen, Bolsonaro said he had planned to stay in the United States until the end of January, but now plans to go back to Brazil sooner to see his doctors. Bolsonaro faces several investigations before the Supreme Court in Brazil, and his future in the United States, where he traveled with a visa issued to heads of state, diplomats and other government officials, is in question. The activist daughter of former Iranian President Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani has been sentenced to 5 years in prison, a lawyer said on Tuesday. The lawyer did not give detail of the charges against Faizi Hashemi, but Tehran's public prosecutor indicted Hashemi last year on charges of propaganda against the system, according to the semi-official ISNA news agency. State media in September reported she had been arrested for inciting riots in Tehran during a protest triggered by the death of a young Kurdish woman in police custody. The demonstrations have posed one of the biggest challenges to Iran's clerical rulers since the 1979 revolution. In 2012, Faizi Hashemi was sentenced to jail and banned from political activities for anti-state propaganda dating back to the 2009 disputed presidential election. Her father died in 2017. Former President Rafsanjani's pragmatic policies of economic liberalization and better relations with the West attracted fierce supporters and equally fierce critics during his life. He was one of the founders of the Islamic Republic. Britain's hopes of becoming a leading destination for the launch of small satellites remain intact despite the failure of the first mission, the country's business minister, Grant Shapps, said on Tuesday, hours after the plan to launch 9 satellites ended when Virgin Orbit's rocket suffered an anomaly which prevented it from reaching orbit. Shapps said another attempt would follow. Virgin's Orbit's chief executive, Dan Hart, said in a statement the group would take corrective actions and hoped to return to orbit as soon as a full investigation had been completed. The rocket was successfully released over the Atlantic from a Boeing 747 that took off from Newquay Airport in western England. The rocket reached 11,000 miles per hour before its system failed. It is the latest in a series of setbacks for European-based space missions. An Italian-built Vega C rocket mission failed after liftoff from French Guiana in late December, and the rockets have since been grounded, while the European Space Agency's Ariane 6 launcher for big satellites has been delayed. The latest mission had been heralded as a historic first for Britain and Europe, as it would have been the first time satellites had been sent into orbit from Western Europe. That is the size of top accolade global news updates. You can follow us on our social media platforms as displayed on your screen. Happy Tuesday!